Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Welcome to our press briefing ahead of IEA-COP26 Net Zero Summit. As my colleague Mr. Mouawad mentioned, it is going to take place the day after tomorrow, on Wednesday, 31st of March. The purpose of this briefing is to tell you about the goals of this summit, and who will be there, and what we would like to do next. But before going to the details, I would like to recognize the leadership of UK presidency, and especially my friend Alok Sharma, the co-chair of the summit. And I know that Mr. Sharma and the entire UK government are working very hard to make the Glasgow a historical success. And we at the IEA, we will do everything in our power to help Mr. Sharma and the UK government. Now, starting with what we aim to achieve in this summit the day after tomorrow. As I guess we all know, the world's largest economies have announced plans, targets for net zero emissions or carbon neutrality by the mid-century. And when we look at those countries, put all of them together, their current emissions are about 70% of global emissions. And looking at the Glasgow from now, this 70% pledges are alone should be a cause for optimism for the UK government, for Glasgow COP26 meeting, and for all of us. It is good that the countries have national targets, but it is far from being enough to reach global climate goals. And we believe that there is a lot of work to be done in order to put right energy policies in order to reach those targets in 2050. And especially, our analysis show that what will happen in the next 10 years will be critical. So our numbers again show that in order to these targets to be achieved, we need rapid and deep transitions in each of the sectors that contribute to global energy demand. It is the electricity generation sector, transportation, manufacturing, petrochemical, iron, steel, cement, and others. And once again, we need credible energy policies, especially in the next 10 years, in order to make those pledges feasible and reachable. Many of you know that on 11th of January this year, I have announced that the International Energy Agency is coming up with a major report, Net Zero in 2050, in order to see what needs to happen in the global energy sector to bring the emissions to net zero in 2050. And our preliminary analysis show that it will require the complete transformation of our existing energy infrastructure. Now, one of the critical aims of this summit is the very important notion of international collaboration and coordination. As I mentioned, nation targets and plans are important, but they are alone not enough, because nation economies are linked to each other through trade flows, capital flows, technology, finance, among others. And if we want these transitions to happen quickly and in an affordable manner, we will need to work much closely together. Therefore, the leitmotif of this summit is international coordination, especially on the clean energy technologies. And it is the reason we have brought representatives of energy and climate ministries, governments, more than 40 countries around the world. This includes ministers and top leaders from the United States, Japan, India, China, European Union, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, France, Germany, Italy, Colombia, Australia, and many, many others. These ministers will join 5 specific ministerial sessions. And these ministers and the top leaders will be joined by a very strong and diverse field of additional participants from energy companies, financial institutions, civil society, and others. You have the full list of confirmed participants in our website, and it includes, as you will see, several thought leaders such as Cristiana Figueres, the former UNFCCC Secretary General, Amine Abu Zaid, Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy of African Union, Stephanie Pfeiffer, CEO of the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, Günther Tallinger from the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. The summit will also feature a unique opportunity, as far as I know, the first this year, to hear from the world's 4 major economies represented by their climate negotiators and leaders. This will be the opening session, and this session includes also Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the recently appointed Director General of the World Trade Organization. In this session, we expect to have a lively discussion with, in alphabetical order, Xi Shenhua, Special Envoy on Climate Change from China, Frans Timmermans, Executive Vice President, European Commission, Raj Kumar Singh, Minister of Power, New and Renewable Energy, India, and John Kerry, Presidential Special Envoy for Climate, United States. Now, as I mentioned, we will have 5 ministerial sessions, and now I would like to turn to my colleague, Mrs. Katherine Dixon, who was leading the team to prepare this summit, to tell you the details about the specific themes, 5 specific themes we have identified for the summit.
Thank you very much. So as Dr. Birol mentioned, there's a great deal more that needs to be done to establish the practical implementation mechanisms that are required to accelerate action. And we hope the 5 summit panels will set the stage for what's needed as we look ahead both to COP26 and the next IEA ministerial. Each one of these panels is being led by 2 members of the IEA family, with an IEA member country opening the panel by setting out a proposition statement for how international coordination can be improved. So we've got 5 panels. We've got, first of all, a panel on catalyzing implementation at the national level, and that's going to examine how we can strengthen the mechanisms to share best practice, collaborate on technology, and provide targeted support across the IEA family and beyond about national transitions. Then we've got a discussion on how states can develop shared strategies to accelerate and coordinate the adoption of clean technologies within sectors. Because, of course, to get to net zero, we need deep energy transitions across all the major energy use sectors. Many of these involve complex value chains that cross national boundaries, so that's going to require much stronger international coordination. The third one then is on mobilizing finance. There's an urgent need to shift gears on climate neutral energy investment if we want to put the world on track for net zero. So this panel will discuss the international efforts required to increase capital flows in emerging markets and developing economies, how we can bridge the policy finance gap. A further panel will then look at how governments can work together to build confidence that commitments will be met. So governments are obviously more likely to take decisive action to accelerate the transition if they think that others are moving in the same direction. So this panel will look at how governments can increase international confidence in the transition by setting out national roadmaps for action over the next cycle 10 years. And then finally, people-centered transitions. So as countries seek to advance their shifts to clean energy technologies, the success of these efforts will rest on enabling citizens to benefit from the opportunity of transition and navigate the disruption. So, this panel will really look at how we can step up and explore new ways to share best practice in designing energy policies that are really people-centered and inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, to finish our briefing, dear colleagues, at least from our side, we are, as my colleague Mr. Mouawad said, we are looking forward to get your questions and comments in a few minutes. But again, our aim is deep in the international coordination, as we need more than ever international collaboration to reach our global energy and climate goals. Perhaps, as you all know, I am a man of numbers. If I can finish with a number, in fact, 3 numbers. When I look at all the governments joining our summit at minister level and above, they make 3 times 80%. More than 80% of the global GDP, more than 80% of the global population, and more than 80% of global emissions. So as such, we hope to have a successful summit for the world, and hope to provide a good input, an important milestone on the road to Glasgow.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol. Thank you, Katherine. So as I said, we'll take a 2-minute break while we compile your questions. Please do send your questions to the Q&A box, and we'll have about a few minutes for those. Thank you. Okay, thank you. We're back. We have a number of questions. We'll take them in threes and we'll have a couple of rounds. So first question from Coleman O'Sullivan from RTE. You've included transport as an area where transformation is needed. How much of this can be achieved by switching to EVs? And how much needs to be done with mass transit and active travel? Question from Katherine Hours from AFP. Can you please be a bit more specific about what type of cooperation we are mentioning or talking about? A follow-up question, are countries that have pledged to reach net zero emissions accounting for 60 or 70% of global energy-related carbon emissions? That includes China with pledges in 2060. Perhaps those two questions for you, Dr. Birol. Two more questions maybe in that first round. One from Terence Creamer from Engineering News. Which minister from South Africa will participate in the summit and in which of the panels? And in question of Stephen Leahy, what minister from Canada is participating? Perhaps Katherine, you can give us a bit of context there.
Let's start with the first question on transport. The transportation sector is perhaps one of the most critical sectors to reach our climate targets. In the power sector, where we have about 38% of the global emissions, we have a very good momentum. Thanks to the renewables, solar and wind growing very strongly, getting cheaper and cheaper. Solar is perhaps the cheapest source of new electricity generation in most countries around the world, and they both enjoy strong support from many governments. We are not yet there in terms of the decarbonization of the global power sector, but there is a lot of good momentum there. But when it comes to transportation sector, our colleague from Ireland, the journalist from Ireland mentioned, this is a critical issue, not only cars, but also trucks and buses. The electric cars are growing very, very strongly, despite the economic downturn around the world. In fact, 29th of April, next month, we are publishing our global energy vehicle outlook. You will see that electric cars are growing very, very strongly and will be a key part of the solution, because transportation sector altogether, cars, trucks, aviation make about 25% of the global emissions. But one bad news is that while the electric cars sales are growing very strongly, there is another type of road transportation which is growing very, very strongly, which is SUVs. When we look at the last year, for example, about 4% of all the cars sold in the world were electric cars, and 42% was SUVs. And it's not only in the United States, but also in China, in Europe, and elsewhere. So we have two, in my view, two jobs, and we will discuss this in our summit. One, provide incentive for the clean transport options, such as the electric cars, electric buses. But the second one is to provide disincentives, financial disincentives for the more polluting transportation options. The second one is from Agence France Presse. What we understand is the following. The international collaboration is extremely critical to reach our climate goals. We are very happy to see that there are national pledges. It's excellent, but in order to turn these national pledges to concrete, real energy, clean energy policies, there is a need for governments to come up with some plans and the financing mechanisms. And here, if we can reach our targets in country X, but if the country Y doesn't do it, it doesn't help to reach the global climate goals. 1 ton of CO2 going to atmosphere from New York or from Jakarta or from Paris, it has the same effect on everybody. Therefore, what we see is that if we have a healthy, robust international collaboration, it will make the clean energy transitions cheaper and more affordable, which is a good news for everybody. It is the reason IEA takes this as a mission in order to cooperate between the countries, share the best practices, and move it to a world which is good for everybody, which is cleaner than it is today. And China, yes, in our 70% calculation, we look at the emissions, global CO2 emissions, and China is definitely part of it. And I believe it will be one of the topics that Mr. Xi Shenhua, Chinese top climate envoy, will address in his opening remarks on Wednesday.
Thank you. And then just addressing the questions on the ministerial attendees. So the South African minister, the Minister for Mineral Resources and Energy, Minister Mantashe, he will be co-chairing the People-Centered Transition Panel. And when we have Minister O'Regan, the Minister of Natural Resources for Canada, who will be co-chairing the Mobilizing Clean Energy Investment Panel.
Great, thank you very much. So a second round of questions, and I'm just scrolling back through them. One from Felix von Geyer, Sustainable Development Reporter. There's been talk about sectoral approaches. Are your ministerial sessions going to include these? Question from Sally Vogel. Which session will specifically address the issues around Scope 3, and how should that be handled by countries and companies? And then final question, again back from Katherine Howard from AFP. Can you give us a little context regarding the state of energy-related emissions? IEA is concerned about coal, and situation of oil is uncertain. She says, does that mean we are expecting a new record in total energy-related emissions this year?
Thank you very much, Jet. If we can go up to see the questions one more time. So the sectoral issues, whether or not they will be addressed, yes, we have a specific session on that. If I'm not wrong, Kat, it's session 3. Yes, it's session 3, which we call Accelerating Technology and Innovation by Sectors. It is going to be chaired by Anne-Marie Trevelyan, Minister of Energy of United Kingdom, and Mr. Zhang Jua, Minister of Energy of China. Just perhaps it gives me the opportunity to highlight that China is participating with 2 high-level leaders. As I mentioned, Mr. Xi Shenhua, who is the top special envoy, climate envoy of China, as well as Minister of Energy, Mr. Zhang Jinshua, who is going to co-chair the sectoral session together with Mrs. Anne-Marie Trevelyan. And we will discuss here what can we do in different sectors, which is a international domain, such as shipping, aviation, iron, steel, petrochemicals, and we are going to discuss these issues. Question from Sally Bogle. Which session? Also, Agence France-Presse, Sally Bogle. No, she is from. Okay. Which session will address the issues around Scope 3 and how this should be handled? This should be a part of the discussion on the panel 5, which is called Building Confidence That Commitments Will Be Realized, which is going to be chaired by Mrs. Teresa Ribera Rodriguez, the 4th Vice President of the government and the Minister for the Ecological Transition of Spain, and Mr. Dave Turk, Deputy Secretary of Department of Energy. As you know, Mr. Dave Turk was until recently, until last Thursday, was a Deputy Executive Director here, but he was quick enough to now to co-chair this session. What we are aiming at the IEA is tracking. So we are happy to encourage the countries to come up with pledges, number 1. Number 2, We are helping many governments around the world, from China to Indonesia, from Indonesia to the United States and others, to put credible energy policies to reach those pledges or targets. And third, tracking. We are going to track countries on an annual basis, whether or not they are on or off track vis-a-vis their emission pledges. And this will be an issue that we will cover, as I said, in Ministerial Panel 5. And the last question I would like to answer is from Agence France-Presse about the emissions 2021. So we have said that 2020 has seen a major decline of emissions, the largest decline since the Second World War. And we said, some of you may remember, last spring, we said, if the governments do not put the right energy policies in place, especially in the context of their sustainable recovery plans, helping to push clean energy projects, providing incentives, financial incentives in terms of sustainable recovery plans, we may see that the emissions will rebound. And our numbers show that, in fact, December 2020 emissions were larger than December 2019 emissions. As the economy starts to recover, we are seeing the emissions to rebound. And I wouldn't be surprised if the governments do not put right energy policies in place as soon as possible. We may see a very strong rebound in 2021, and we will miss the historic opportunity to have 2019 as the peak of global emissions. So everything will depend on the government policies that will be injected in the recovery packages in the next weeks and months to come.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol. And this wraps up our briefing for today. Just would like to invite you all once again to join the summit on Wednesday. It will be live streamed. All sessions will be live streamed on our website and our social media. The date for the roadmap report that we are releasing again is 18th of May. And in the meantime, Dr. Birol will also going to be, he referenced emissions for 2021. We'll be releasing the Global Energy Review in the second half of April with a lot more detail on all of this. So thank you very much for your time, and we will see you all on Wednesday. Thank you.